Now let's discuss about a concept called CSS specificity. It is about priority. It is about clashing. It is about the actual point which I was mentioning earlier, the cascading nature. What is cascading? Cascading is basically layers one above another, right? For example, right now, what you see is on H1, there is a color blue and let's say font size is 30 pixels. So, and you also have an ID here, right? And you have a class. ID is something which we apply on a single element, but let's say you have a class here. H1, that means the color will be blue and font size will be 30 pixels. Assume that on this H1, what if I apply class MOC? Now what happens here? Because H1 element selector is there, right? The color will be blue and font size will be 30 pixels. But then it also sees that class is also applied, which has color red, font size 40 pixels and font family cursive. Now what happens? See this. Color and color, that is the clashing value. Font size is the clashing value and font family is not clashing, that is unique. This is where when multiple styles are getting applied on the same H1, right? That is the element selector and class selector. There is something called priority. There is something called CSS specificity. What internally CSS does is the class will have always higher priority over element selector. That means for color, the color will be taken from class. The font size will be taken from class because that's also clashing. The font family is unique. Let me just shift this font family in this. That is the element selector. Now what happens? The color will be red. The font size will be 40 pixels. Do we have font family here? No, it is in element selector. So what it will do? For this particular H1, the first H1, because the class is also applied on this, the color will be red, font size will be 40 pixels. For second H1, the color will be this one, right? The font size will be 30 pixels and font family will be cursive. Because only for the first H1, the things are getting clashed. The rules are getting clashed, that is. Let's check the output. Now you see that the first and the second H1, let me just click on inspect element here. The first H1, let me just scroll down this thing. You see, check this area. Color from H1 is striked out. Font size is striked out. Font family is not striked out. That means the font family is taken from this class. These are ticked and these are striked out. There is something called priority, and when there is a clash, the element selector will not have higher priority. The class selector will have priority. But what if you give this settings also? Let's say on this H1, I'll remove this ID from this place now. Let me remove this paragraph entirely and assume that I give ID also. ID is equal to my unique settings. Now what happens? See this. What is clashing is important. Something which is unique, not to worry. Now see, first thing, ID selector will have the highest priority over all other selectors. That means anyway, the color will be chosen from this. But assume that this does not have color, right? It just has font size. So for the first H1, what happens? Font size and font family will be certainly taken from the ID selector. Then it will check, does the class have anything which this does not have? Class has the color, so color will be taken from this place. And from this particular thing, this element selector, nothing will be considered because all these three, this also has. But if it had something else also, right, then that would have been considered. Considering that that setting is not in class or ID selector. So let's try this now and again see the output, compare the output so you get the idea about it. Let me refresh, right? The first H1 is the one where the clashing is happening. Observe this. menu setting, these two are selected. From class font size is striked out, and from h1 the element selector everything is striked out. There is nothing which is taken from this place. When I say cascading, what does this mean? It means like this: you have one layer, you have another layer, you have one more layer over it, and this is how it goes on. Or you can consider the mathematical union. You have something common, you have something unique. Cascading is basically what? There are layers of settings and you might see that there is a clash. That's why it is called as cascading, because there will always be one or the other thing clashing, but then CSS will take care of it.